heard there's gonna be good weather this weekend.
Yeah, it's
Dry,
gonna be good
yeah.
weather this weekend.
It's gonna be a
Cool.
pretty Easter weekend.
Yeah.
Pretty Easter weekend, because that's when the thing in the better, good. Let me get my gavel here, come my thing will.
Just pound on the table, Mayor.
It should be behind you.
It should. Yes, sir. Okay. If it open up, you want to do something.
Okay, let me get prepared.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Yep. Okay.
So, I'm gonna forward him the information that I got from workers' comp about his attorney, but I just wanted to make you aware, so I'll bring it up.
Will you, yeah, just keep me in the loop.
I will.
I mean, they're the experts. Is it Sharon Morgan and them? Yeah, 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 they're good. They're good.
Just wanted to kind of give you a heads up.
Yeah.
Good morning. We're going to call our meeting to order. We'll stand and have pledge of allegiance by Councilmember Betsy Wagonhouse and prayer by Councilmember Latham.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Father, we just come to you today. We have a lot of business to work on, and we pray that you will give us guidance so that the things that we discuss, things that we do, are in the benefit of our constituents of the city of Madison. We ask all this in your holy name. Amen.
All our council members are present this morning. You've had an opportunity to review the minutes of our last meeting and our work session as well. If we could just get a nod from our council to put these on our work session agenda. On our meeting agenda for April. Okay. You'll put that on the agenda for April. Thank you so much. Topics for discussion, downtown parking. John, if you would start us off with that.
Yes, we were just awaiting the arrival of our planning department. The first agenda item deals with downtown parking. There have, from time to time, been issues raised regarding downtown parking and a lot of questions on the part of our council. So we asked Monica and her staff to be here today to kind of remind us or refresh our memories in terms of what ordinances, rules, and regulations are presently in place for retail operations downtown and for apartments and residences in the downtown area. So the first question is, what are the rules presently? Secondly, there was questions about whether there are whether we've granted variances or whether there are entities that aren't following the rules and regulations. And so we've asked Monica to, and Mr. Phillip to address that as well. Monica?
And I'm actually not gonna be alone in this endeavor. I'm gonna invite a couple folks up to help me, so that we can give information and then Philip can address code enforcement concerns. But I'm gonna ask Molly and, if, Sarah will also come, because Sarah's been instrumental in trying to make some of these things, become, finite details instead of, anecdotal evidence. So, and Ken, will you pull up some talking points for us to work off of? Y'all just gonna sit back there? Okay, fine, I'll just sit by myself. Okay, so, good morning, everyone. So the last parking class I sat through was 4 hours, so this one, we're gonna make it much more condensed than that, okay? As you know, we actually maintain a good plethora of parking in our downtown for our various uses. We did a full parking study in '99, we did one in 2006, we did one in 2012. For this one today, it's not a full-blown parking study. You will receive a report at a later time, so you don't have to copy slides or anything. You will get a handwritten report. But today we wanted to hear from you about what other things we might want to collect or what other things you might want to know about so that we can encompass that within it. We also did a very specific study area. And so this plays off both what the manager requested us to do as well as comments that Councilmember Joyce has raised in the last couple of months, and we were trying to address those as well. So I think we have a remote. You guys just chime in when you see something you want to talk about. All right, so parking is always a contemplative issue in our downtown, but I wanted to start off with a little bit of humor this morning and say that it's never as difficult as we think it is. It's always a little bit easier than we think. So we're going to start with the types of parking. So there are various ways that we regulate parking. We regulate the creation of new parking when we include that in our zoning ordinance, and I'm going to let Molly speak to that. But first and foremost, we regulate the public asset that we built, that we created, and that we maintain, and that we monitor. And so here's the section of the Code of Ordinances that specifically regulates timed parking. So timed parking is owned by the city, maintained by the city, and everywhere is 2 hours except for a couple of brief places. There's 15 minutes outside of City Hall, there's 15 minutes in front of the post office, and there are some weird leftover 1 hour spots in front of Bank of Madison. Other than that, and we have this one area of Own Street that's untimed. We're going to show you that and talk to that as well. But what it says, our ordinance says that any person, owner or operator, and that includes employees, that work in a trade, a business, or a profession, or are a resident in our downtown, they are limited when it comes to the timed parking zone. This is the regulation. And so the question is always, are we managing our timed parking as well as we could? When we did our last survey, we had 385 on-street parking spaces in the whole downtown. Again, this study only covers a 3-block area, so we haven't recounted the whole number. 6-block area, I'm sorry. So we haven't recounted the whole number, but we have about 400 on-street parking spaces, give or take a little bit. We also did an inventory of the private lots within the 6-block area. So when we talk about the 6-block area, I've got a slide that'll show you that, but we specifically wanted to look at who is providing on-street parking. Some of these are from our older study, and we're recounting those now, but I'm just going to go down from the top provider down to the bottom. Morgan County's got a big lot behind the courthouse. They also lease the whole lower deck, although some have been lost to repairs in that corner when you turn in on the right. The upper part of the deck, the city used to lease the whole upper deck, which was about 150 spaces. That lease was canceled by the property owner, and so those spaces were limited to the residential living, which allowed it to come in downtown, the Uptown Gym, and then when the zoning went forward for GMC, that owner pledged spaces in the upper deck, although they're not labeled for that. So we know that some of that upper deck is being used for that. You'll see that Truist, or if you're old school, it's SunTrust, then Chop House, then the Sinclair lot. The Chop House lot is on there twice for some reason. I'll catch that edit next time. Sinclair Street Side has 8 spaces. Then you have Chop House Street Side, the Jag lot, the private alley behind Block E, that is behind Lambert and Reitman. Everybody thinks that's a city alley. It is not. And then you have the City Hall alley and the Madisonian. So we're recounting those right now to give you a finite count of what's in that area, and we'll compare that to the number of businesses and the number of employees they have for you in your report. So in terms of the employee parking, we create off-street spaces because this section of the ordinance regulates them to not be able to park on street. So we do create off-street spaces. It is not a surprise that we have some pushing and shoving going on in this corner of the world, because remember, the 150 spaces the city was renting have gone away, right? So that employee parking got strained because the parking we were providing was no longer being provided. So we're not surprised by the strain. This is the zoning for the downtown, and I just want to highlight, actually, I'm not going to highlight, watch me do this. I'm going to let Molly.
All right, so the study area that we looked at is the 2 blocks to either side of the post office, and then the blocks to the southeast of those as well. So everything from Main Street down to Hancock Street and those properties that abut the south side of Hancock Street. So we want you to be aware of the difference in zoning of those, right? So you've got our downtown zoning, our C1 zoning in that light pink, that goes from the High Street to Burnett Street and stops at Burnett. And then anything past that, so that's going to be the Morgan County administrative facilities, the parking deck, shop house, the residential living, all of that's in our P2 zone. So just be aware of those 2 different zoning districts that exist within this study area and the differences in the regulations that apply to those 2 areas. So again, employee parking, but the parking requirements for each of those is very different. So C1, I want you to look at the reason why there's an exemption, because of the pedestrian nature and emphasis upon the downtown area, the presence of ample on-street parking, and the allowance of commercial garages. New buildings and uses within the C1 district are exempt from these requirements, except for dwelling units, lodging establishments, or places of public assembly. Those are the only 3 uses that require dedicated off-street parking in the C1 district. We have a table here of what those requirements are. So within our downtown area, the only type of residential you're really going to have is that multifamily unit. So that requires 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. Places of public assembly, that's sort of our conference areas, 1 space for each full-time employee and 1 space per 4 seats. And churches and government, yes. C1 is our downtown area, so it's this light pink area that you see here.
It's like brick sidewalks, and brick sidewalks, 2-story, and it bellies up, has 0 lot line, it bellies up to the sidewalk. That's what makes the difference between C1 and P2.
Well, not in this instance though, because there's a slight overlap in that aesthetic with C1 and P2 in this study area specifically. And that's in that southwest corner there where Hancock and Burnett end. So the places of public assembly require 1 space for each employee, 1 space per 4 seats, provided for patron use. 18 inches of bench space equals 1 seat. And then for lodging, 1 space per guest room or recreational vehicle space, and 1 space per 5 full-time employees. So again, these are the only requirements for C1 in terms of the provision of off-street parking. P2, off-street automobile parking is required for all land use categories, and I specifically mention restaurants here because this is one of the uses that we do have in the P2 area within our study area, and that's 1 space per 4 seats for patron use and 1 space for every 75 square feet of floor area provided for patron use.
So for this study, we went around that 6-block area, and which on our map, which we'll show you, was A, B, C, D, E, and N blocks. And we went around for a full week, 7 days, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., and we took an inventory of all of the on-street parking in each location, and went around counting to see how many filled spaces, where those filled spaces were, and how many empty spaces we had. We have 127 on-street spaces. That does not include the 11 handicap spaces and 3 reserved specifically for individuals such as the Superior Court judge or county manager, or loading and unloading in front of the courthouse. And then there are 3, that picture is tilted to the side, but you can see that there's an unofficial reserved sign. So 3 of the on-street parking going down East Jefferson alongside the courthouse. Sometimes those signs are turned around where they reserve those spaces, and sometimes the signs are turned towards the courthouse so they're open to anybody. So those are the 3 unapproved reserved spaces in downtown in the study area. Is it this one to the right? Yeah. Okay, find out. This is the study area again, and the map that we use to account for where those locations are in downtown. You'll note that the handicapped are in the bluish purple. The reserved specifically are in reddish pink. Everything else is open to the public and open to anybody to park, again, with the exception of the ordinances, which have employees and designated people working in buildings downtown. So within that 6-block area, what we discovered was that there's a weekly average of 68 of the 127 spaces that are full, which is 54% use of the total capacity we have in downtown. So that indicates to us there is not a strain on the on-street parking the city is providing. There is plenty of space for people to come into downtown, park, and find a space to enjoy downtown, walk around, go eat, shop, enjoy the parks, all of that. In the busiest single hour of the week, we were only at 75% of the total capacity. And that was at 96 cars. So we still had 25% room. And there were only a few hours where we approached that 75%. Those were around lunch on Friday and Saturday. The busiest section of all of the study area was in front of the Creamery, or N Block, going all the way down to the end of Hancock Street, in front of like the assisted living, back down that way. We noticed in this study that that is where the only on-street untimed public parking is currently in the downtown. As a result, there's an extended use by employees in that area for the untimed, as well as in the timed parking on Hancock. And I know that because I was keeping a track on which cars, and I was keeping a track on which license plates, and people were there for far more than the 2 hours most of the day in other cases. And that extended use also applied to designated employees with designated employee parking areas who are there. So employees who have, for employees who have specific designated off-street parking were using the timed on-street parking for extended use.
Where is the off-street parking for these employees?
That would be the lower deck of that parking deck down at the end of Hancock, as well as the upper deck.
Okay, thank you.
I will say Sarah's doing a really good job. We're trying not to use names this morning. So one of those is a governmental entity, and one of them is a private entity. They were on your chart. They have designated parking areas, and they are enjoying our own street parking a little bit more than they should.
Indeed.
Right, so this is an indication, again, of that busiest section. The portion going down of parking from that stop sign in the picture going back down is where we have untimed parking spaces currently that are city-owned. Yes.
So I would like to draw your attention to two things that you'll see here. One is that the owned street parking in this vicinity on your left, to start with, thank you, Ken. Oh, you're just voice-activated software this morning. That area, a portion of that used to be timed, and those untimed signs were removed, not by the city. And so that is an area that we would have the city manager look at and just evaluate whether that we should treat all of our own street parking the same, and should it receive the same timing, and should all the signs be re-erected, and look at that. On the right-hand side, I know that we've had discussions. Oh, thank you, Ken. So I know we've had discussions about this private parking lot and whether that Hancock Street parking is ours or not. There is no doubt that it is ours. If you look at the property line, Ken, you got an arrow that you can give me? Thank you. That right there is the property line. So you will notice that we own 6 feet into the parking lot built by Tom Dupree. There was some horse trading there. And so not only do we own the own street parking, but technically we own about half of one side of the parking lot. But we don't maintain it, and another person uses it, and that's great. And I'm not pointing that out to be evil or anything. I'm just saying that it is clear without a doubt that the Hancock Street parking within the 80-foot public right-of-way does belong to the city of Madison, and it is John's discretion whether we time it or not time it. And that's the only point I'm making. Carrie, did you have a question?
I do. May I, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
So you're saying that we own the parking, on the other side of this white car, right?
Yes.
Correct. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, that's why we put the map beside the picture. So we own where you see the black car, the white car, and down. The timed signs there have been removed. And we actually own 6 feet into the white car, the red car area. But we're not contesting that, and I'm not making a big deal of it. I'm just saying that there is no doubt that the property line does not run where you see the trees. The property line actually runs through the middle of the cars on the right.
Who removed the signs?
I'll let Philip speak to that when he comes up. I'm trying real hard not to say names. I'm just pointing out that if y'all want to make that own street parking timed, that there's no doubt that we own it.
And we own where the white and the red car is as well.
Well, you own 6 feet of it. A parking spot is required to be 10 feet in depth. You only own 6 of the 4.
So,
But that was built with Tom Dupree and some negotiation there, okay?
if it was golf carts there, it could be ours, but regular cars.
I think you'd need to employ Jay to help you with access, because the access to get to those spaces would be over someone else's property. So we're probably not gonna argue over those. Does that help y'all understand that Hancock belongs to us? Okay, all right.
Yep.
Just to clarify, it's also in front of the Creamery building is also our parking.
Yes, ma'am, that was not in debate.
Okay.
So as we're moving through this,
Thank
we're
you.
trying to, or things that have been stated in public that were not based in fact, and so we're just trying to hit those factual things as we go, so we're providing as much clarity to y'all as possible. But no, ma'am, we own
Right.
an 80-foot wide right-of-way and have since 1809.
Okay, perfect. And I'm so sorry, I know, but across the street as well, so across the street from the area we're talking about, that's not timed any longer, but used to be timed, across the street is also our parking.
It is, and
And-
a lot of the parking we see there, there are allocated spaces in the upper deck for those people. They were parked there 8 hours. Every time I counted, every time Sarah counted, Ken, Molly, everybody helped out with counting. The cars were parked there for a full day.
So across the street?
Correct, in front of that brick building in the picture,
Okay.
the tall brick building on the left.
Everything flanking Hancock.
Thank
Okay.
thank you.
That's good to know.
Yep. Are there any other questions related to this image before we continue on with our findings? Okay. All right. Well, I will keep going. Thank you, Ken. All right. So, again, that busiest section was in that photo, and going up Hancock in front of the Creamery building to the block end. Yes.
So one of the things that we heard was that the on-street parking being used by long-term parkers, maybe employees, was not being diligently ticketed. And so Philip will speak to that when he comes up, but we did ask him to do additional ticketing, and he can speak to that. But I wanted to address that here so you would know that that was one of the things you're going to hear about. And then the other thing is, from at least two people, we did hear conversations that there is a perception, Philip, you hear me say this, perception, not a reality, of selective enforcement. There's also a little Facebook yabble going on if you haven't been watching it. But it's also, it's all about the perception of selective enforcement, that certain people are allowed to get away with things and certain people aren't. So Philip will address the Hancock issue when it comes up today.
Thank you. Well, one of the other things that was seen somewhat regularly in different locations from different people was non-permitted use of the rights of way. This included sidewalks and extended use of parking that's on street and timed and supposed to be 2 hours. That was being used for construction purposes, loading or unloading, deliveries. Some people parked up on sidewalks, and we have pictures as well. People blocking off for building repairs, taping off entire 5-foot stretches of sidewalk, forcing people to either go around a block or push them out into the street. If they're able to do the step down into the street, if they're in a wheelchair, that's not an option, to go around. So these are some of those pictures of the unapproved uses of public rights of way. And those are just a few of them. The picture on the left, which I know is a little bit harder to see in this, that is a truck and trailer with supplies, and in front of it, 2 spaces are also blocked off, coned off for the same construction, renovation, repair usage. So they were blocking 4 spaces of 7 along that South Main block.
Pretty much all week.
Yes, and they were out there every single day of those 7 days, plus I haven't gone to see if they're still out there today, but there was 1 to 4 spaces every day that full week blocked off. And then on the right is also trip hazards, other stuff that way. They had cords, power lines, hoses throughout the whole sidewalk, and every time I went past, especially on the weekend, I just picked up the hoses and pulled them across closer to the building every single time I walked past. And each time I came back, they were back out in the middle of the sidewalk.
So, Sarah, were they working on I guess they were working on the building there? So they have no other options, I don't guess, but to park there?
They were parking there. They probably could have unloaded some of the stuff in the trailer. That's a discussion probably for another day, but it did bring it to our attention that there is a use of public rights-of-way permit that is probably in need of some revisions to include the on-street parking and to include sidewalk specifically, and to have a potential fee structure added into that, and I'll get into that in a moment. I have drafted up something for review, which will be has been shared with Monica and will be shared with our city manager so that they can review it and see if that's something they want to implement with those changes. But this is just part of the findings, is that this is a regular thing that people are doing without permitting. Another part of it was construction, working with sawhorses and saws and on public sidewalks. There were also vehicles parking, taking up multiple spaces. On the left is in front of the post office on West Washington Street, and then on the right is in front of Hart and Crown, parked for various lengths of time, taking up multiple spaces, parallel parked along the sidewalk.
So this gives us two problems. First and foremost, the public sidewalks are provided for egress by pedestrians. So first of all, we're not maintaining the proper ADA access that we are supposed to accommodate to the traveling public. So therefore, this opens us up to legal claims that we don't want. The second thing is it's a public safety hazard. I went by at one time and there were 7 or 8 cords all bundled running down the city sidewalk. Trip hazards, we know that our brick sidewalks are not perfectly level everywhere, but we don't need additional trip hazards. We're removing them as we add tree grates. So you have that public safety element in addition to the ADA compliance. Third of all, there were at least 1 or 2 people who've said, well, you made me do this. And that means like, and I will draw your attention, when the bakery was building out, we required a wood safety tunnel for that person to provide access that was safe for the moving public. In this instance, there were at least 8 instances, separate locations that we counted in this 1 week period where nobody's bothered to notify the city in any way whatsoever. So we have that happening. And not only is it blocking parking, and I'm not harping on this one, but this one is the most fraught for me. The final one on this one is it gives Main Street no opportunity to give a courtesy notice to the merchant that may be affected, because this is not affecting necessarily the building that they're working on, it's affecting the whole area. So with the North Main Street block, we have 8 storefronts down that, or 8 businesses and storefronts. It blocked the whole, there was never more than 1 or 2 cars able to park in front of that whole area. So it basically took that block out of business for a week. So I talked through the idea with John, and we do have an idea for a permit structure. Sarah was kind enough to go ahead and do up an application, but we haven't had a chance to get the application by John first, because we want to make sure that this is something you want to look at. We do think that there should be some business-friendly option, like 2 or 3 days, the manager approves 2 spaces. That's cool, we get that. That needs to happen. We've got buildings that there should be a business-friendly option. But if it's extended, we ought to at least get a courtesy notice so we can tell our downtown people. And if it's gonna be super extended, every one of those spaces generates about $30,000 at a minimum a year for the city. They're taking money out of the coffers by using those spaces. And so there are permit fees for everything you do in construction, and maybe extended use of a parking space needs to be added to that list. The other things that I think that we observed that made us a little crazy, but I didn't get a shot of, is you see that orange overhead, what do you call it? Cherry picker? Cherry picker, thank you. It was actually on the public sidewalk in front of the old, not Eo Colonial, what is it? Barking Dogs. It was actually parked on our city sidewalk, and we're not rated for heavy equipment on top of those bricks. So that could leave us with damage, and nobody's bothering to, look behind that.
From a distance, but.
So also some public damage. So that's getting a little too permissive, and that needs to be cut back a little bit.
So can I ask you something? If those construction guys are working, should they not be parked there on weekends when the traffic is heavy downtown, when parking is needed on weekends? How do you?
I think that's a conversation for you all to have, and city manager, with anything like that, with the permits of that. Certainly if there's an extended use, like we were saying, maybe there's a fee structure that goes into that. And one thing was, when it was raining, they were not working. And anytime it looked like it might rain, they weren't working. And so they still had their equipment out there. And I understand there's a loading and unloading, but there were certain days when they weren't necessarily out there working with it. But that orange cherry picker lift was still parked out there, blocking off 1 to 1.5 spaces of public on-street parking. We're gonna keep moving forward to just keep timely, but just leave it to say that we've noticed that this is actually more pervasive than it's ever been in the past. With 8 instances in a week, this is too much. It's a lot of strain in a 6-block area. So we're gonna be taking some suggestions to John on, but there should be some business friendly. It does cost money to mobilize and not mobilize. And if you're not lazy, there is plenty of parking
when we have a non-event weekend, for businesses to probably leave their equipment there, but we might want to designate where the select locations are instead of it just being wherever they want them to be. And so just some guidance to help it make it a little bit more business friendly. So just some thoughts on that. Sarah, keep going.
Well, these are, again, additional instances of loading or unloading. That photo is tilted, lopsided. We'll fix it, and we can always share these with you where they're right side up. But it's, again, just an instance of a trailer being parked on, up on the public sidewalk on the bricks.
I assure you they were straight when they were putting it.
It's okay. So, yeah. So again, just moving on from our findings, conflicts, going into some little fix-its, ideas and suggestions, was to remove directional parking signage on South Main, because I did go around and I was looking for where we actually do have signs indicating public untimed parking, and there are some signs that are directional, getting people from Main Street to those lots. And there's one back from when the city rented the upper deck that is in front of Chop House, directing people to turn right at the Chop House, coming into downtown from South Main. And we no longer have untimed parking back there. So you get back there and then there's no directional parking. People might go into that lot or park on in the untimed streets or other stuff that way, but it's confusing, and that sign just needs to get pulled because we no longer have a lot back there to offer people. So that's an easy fix. A lot of the parking in downtown in that 6 blocks area that I was walking should probably be repainted to provide clarity, and as well as ADA accessibility, and make sure that people are not parking where there aren't spaces. And then another part was to just recheck those ADA spaces for compliance and capacity. There are a few places where it's a little tight at a corner, turning in front of Barking Dogs from South Main going onto East Washington. And then there's also an ADA space on East Jefferson side of the post office where there are now 2 additional spaces. I wonder if I can back up all the way there. If you look up to that A block where the Main Street is, to the upper right of A block, there's a handicap spot and then 2 additional spaces, so there is no access for a ramp to come out from there. So those are just things that maybe we'd want to get inspected and see where we need handicap spaces, and if the handicap spaces we have currently marked are actually functioning. Mm-hmm.
So let me add to that. We're required to have an ADA compliance plan by DOT. We've done that in the past. It is due for update. Hey, Molly, that gets to be one of your fun things. Molly doesn't have to take phone calls all day, so she gets to work on long-term planning. So we do need to update the ADA plan, and the transportation plan will actually be pulling a piece of that into the transportation plan. Accessibility in downtown is one of those things. We're lucky enough that we have a state fire marshal at the local level, and Jean can actually check each and every space and tell us how many we have, if they're compliant, which ones need a little bit of updating. But Sarah did try to identify like low-level fixes that we could do that wouldn't be really costly. John, we're trying to work things in that are maybe low-hanging fruit, and then we can talk about some long-term policy. So if you'll let me, I'll actually go over the recommendations. Are you okay with that? All right, so we're going to take y'all to the end and close out here, and then let Philip specifically address parking. So there are a couple of small recommendations we think that are easy to do, that are not costly to do. One is we think the 2-hour timed parking should apply to all parking. We got a couple spaces in front of Bank of Madison. There's no reason not to make them 2-hour, just like everything else. Why is it confusing? Why is it 1 hour there? I really think that we probably just skipped those signs when we were changing them out. The 15-minute next to the parking for the city and the post office makes sense. You're going in, you're paying a bill, you're dropping off a letter. Everything else ought to be 2 hours. Here specifically, we think that the Hancock timed parking that is unequivocally owned by the city needs to be timed like everything else. And that would give us 15 more regular spaces and 3 handicap spaces. That encourages employees to use their designated spaces that are off-street. And it frees up 18 more spaces for customer use in our downtown. I will say I think that will help the 2 adjoining restaurants that maybe are frustrated that maybe there's not enough parking for their restaurant clientele. Well, there would be if employees weren't parked in the potential timed spaces. So that would free up 20 more spaces next to the, or 18 more spaces next to the Chop House and the dining room, who are 2 of our big restaurants in that nearest vicinity. We think that John has a great relationship with the county manager, and we would implore that he would appeal to the county manager and the fact that he gets a reserved spot if he would ask his employees to actually use the reserved lower deck, which the county has a long-term lease on, and really get their employees to park there. It negates the perception that there is selective enforcement. I will say that Philip did a really good job and has tagged a couple of people in the last 2 weeks. And then we think that the third really high thing that we should look at, but is a low-hanging fruit thing to do, is that when people come into the planning department and they're pulling their construction permits, there's no reason that we don't go ahead and make them acknowledge where they plan to use the city's property. And then that permit would not necessarily be issued by my office. We would just be collecting the data, the information, the permit fee, and then that would go to John for approval. It's always been the city manager's discretion of how that gets used. We're not suggesting putting a specific time frame on it, because that's an extremely business-friendly, got-to-figure-it-out scenario. And then after the permit is issued, they would receive a decal or something to put in their window or something to attach to something, or at least Philip would be notified that they had permission to be there. And then Main Street could be notified so that they could be customer friendly to our businesses. So that's the low-hanging fruit. And then I'm gonna, I wanted to end with this. So there are some other issues that are going on that we can't really talk about. So one is the public is not aware how often we are making acquisition offers or how often we're negotiating for long-term spaces. They can't be aware of that. If we were to make them aware of that, it would make it cost more to get it done. We have made no less than 4 offers on private property for untimed parking. The loss of the deck in this area was a big issue. And it's perhaps something we could revisit. If we could develop a friendly relationship, maybe we can revisit that. But what I want to end with is, in the report that you will get, there will also be some information on residential parking. That's one of the things that we did not hit today. There is a large concern that residential users are not meeting that first section of the ordinance that we went over. So I want to just briefly run down the residential in this area. We are doing a collective study of residential and parking in downtown for the whole downtown, but today I'm just going to hit the ones that were there. So we have, above the funeral home, there are 6 units. Behind that, there are 4. So there's 10 units all total right there above Heart and Crown. I'm going to quit saying funeral home. Above the Heart and Crown, there are 10 units. Total. There is one above, what's Shield Colonial now? Barking Dog. There's one above Barking Dog. And then there is one above the Madisonian, which is the Blue Boutique, okay? So we are literally talking about 12 units. They are required to provide 1.5 spaces for themselves. The one that's the Blue Boutique has its own parking on site right behind it. The, I'm gonna go back right quick to the private parking lots, because I think that helps, okay? So for the one unit that is above Barking Dogs, it does not have designated parking. And we've had some conflict with them parking on street, and we've had to deal with that. I want to be clear, that is before the city took over issuing permits. And so the county did not catch that. They did not request where that parking space was. So when Kathy Russell built that out, when that space got built out, it did not have a parking space. So that's one space. Molly did call the gentleman who now owns it, and they are recommended to park at the Truist parking lot, okay? So 1.5 spaces of Truist, they're looking for a space there at night. And Truist does have 28 spaces, and they're not there at night, okay? So then you have 10 spaces above the Heart and Crown. This seems to be the area of contention. For those 6 spaces above the old funeral home part, you will notice that the Sinclair has 18 spaces, and that's where they are instructed to park. Now, does that mean they don't park there at night, in the evening, post our hours? We're only 9 to 5. So after 5 o'clock, does that mean they don't use on street? But we're not ticketing, and we're not coding, and we're not checking that. But I can tell you from going around at 6 o'clock, there's not a parking problem at 6 o'clock. So the 4 spaces that are behind that in the, what used to be Mint Julep, right? Is everybody following me? It's now the dining room. Mm-hmm. Those 4 spaces were also done before the city took over permitting. So again, those 4 don't have parking, and we think that's some of the folks we're seeing. But again, all of the tenants in that building, there are 10, are told to use the Sinclair lot. There's more than enough spaces to handle the parking for the residential. So I'm not saying that's going to be the answer we're going to find all over downtown when we provide you the residential study, but in this 6-block area, you have 12 residential units. There's more than sufficient parking on the ground for them that's being provided by their property owners, except for the one above the Yale Colonial, the Barking Dogs. Any questions for us before we let Philip close out with code enforcement?
Just one question.
Yes.
I understand that, well, people could park at the Madison's Road. We can no longer park there at Madison's Road. Is that?
It's private property. They can do with it what they will. We have to remind people from time to time that we do not do code enforcement on private property lots. If they sign their property and say that it's no longer available for the public, it's not. So I have not been told to get off their lot, but the one I avoid is Bank of Madison. They need every bit of their parking, and they'll remind you if you decide to park there long term. I also note that we don't advertise the county lot behind the courthouse because it's not our property. We don't have permission to advertise it, but we do commonly tell people there's overflow parking. Not one person that surveyed, Ken, you too, right? It was never full. So there's always been overflow parking in the county lot. And I thank you for your time. Any questions for Sarah or?
Could I, Mr. Mayor?
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to cut you off. I'm so sorry. I was watching John's face. I was trying to be timely.
There's no turning and fleeing. Could I say something, Mayor? Monica mentioned some comments of mine. So let me just, when I first looked at this, and it was based on what Mr. Ream said at our council meeting a while back. So I started looking at it, and I came across this section 520, table 3, which talks about parking requirements. And it's the title of that chart in our zoning ordinance is parking space requirements for all zoning districts. Seems pretty clear. It needs an asterisk because Monica very gently in her style pointed out my error, which occasionally I do make errors. So she pointed out the exception that is a little bit above that in the zoning ordinance about its exception for the commercial district, C1. So those rules don't apply except for dwellings, but it certainly doesn't apply to restaurants. And one of the reasons it is specified is why it wouldn't apply. It has the words, let's see, it describes the presence of quote, ample on-street parking. When I first saw that, I thought, I'm not sure ample is the adjective I would be using, but after hearing Sarah's presentation, I'm leaning a little bit more. I wouldn't maybe go as far as ample, but I'm heading in that direction. I didn't quite realize we still had 25% unoccupied.
Yes, and that was at the busiest single hours, which were 3. Usually it was lower than that. We were at 60, 70% occupancy use that way, and more of that will be in the full report that way. But Yeah, it wasn't like we were at 75%
We were
the whole week.
54% most of the time.
Mhm.
So two quick things. I think as we're talking about individual spaces, whether I can recall the construction dumpster that was in front of West Washington for 6 months, maybe longer, while they remodeled the building. But I also think of and I hate any courthouse people here, there's 3 temporary, or maybe 4 temporary signs, those white wooden signs that the courthouse puts on our
That's what I
part.
was concerned
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, that.
If we want to award those as reserved spaces, and that is our discretion, not the county's, they don't own those. I'd love to see us find a better way to do that instead of chaining the reserved signs to the post. That seems like a very unclassy way to do that, and we could do that a little bit better. If y'all want to award those spaces to the county, we should do that, but as far as I know, no one garnered permission to do that. So, and I wouldn't point that out as a negative, it's just that, I've got a couple of, 2 observations I want to offer.
Okay,
One
let me-
is,
let me
no,
just-
finish,
Let me
go
just
ahead.
finish, and then I think it puts some pressure on John, because I think John's the one who's gonna have to be figuring out how to deal with the county. As we talk about all the county employee parking along Hancock, and these 4 with the reserves, we gotta remember that they control 120 spaces behind the courthouse.
That's correct.
So that's up to you to figure that out, John.
I like
I
that.
say we give them the 3 reserved if they let us market the lot.
Well, my thing is, may I, Mr. Mayor? So for me, the unofficial is the biggest part. They did it without, whoever did it, someone did it without actually asking. So if we're gonna award it, I wanna award it and make sure it's from the city, and at the same time, do some type of exchange so that we can use some of the parking that is, in the county.
Well, I'm
Lots.
sure John's deft enough to work us through that scenario. I've got 2 observations I want to offer. One is, we have enjoyed full capacity in downtown in occupancy of buildings for the last 3 to 6 years, give or take a little bit. Once Preston took over the big white elephants and generated those back into utility, we really are running at 100% occupancy, which is every downtown's desire, right? We are the poster child for the state when it comes to that. People come to us and ask us how to recruit people, and we say, you need to ask somebody else. We don't have to do that. Our downtown recruits itself, because it is, so I say that because people, when they complain that we don't have enough parking, you have to listen beyond what they're saying. They're not saying we don't have enough parking. They're saying we don't have enough parking within 50 feet
Right,
of the
in front of
store
our
or 100 feet of the store, because we didn't do the whole downtown. We may have other areas that have some stress. We acknowledge that. We're gonna work on Jefferson Street next, right? But in this 6-block area, what we've discovered is 54% occupancy doesn't mean that we don't have enough parking if you're willing to walk 250 feet. But we have 2 things that are going on. America is aging, and people that go to restaurants that are more aged want more handicap and more close parking. So that's gonna be a push. 2, we lost the city parking in the corner, so we expected some stress in this area. But we're floating at 54% capacity, but we're 100% occupancy. We're doing okay. The one area where we can do better, that I think the final study will show once we do the whole downtown, is that Madison needs more untimed off-street parking for employees. The
Yes.
next study you see out of us is gonna show, for the number of employees we have downtown, we don't have enough off-street, but we are working on that. We just can't talk about it a lot to the public, so they think we're not working on it.
Right.
Mr.
I
Mayor-
totally,
Mr. Mayor, 2 observations. The first is, from the presentations made today, I hope it is very clear to all that our planning department and our Main Streets program is fully engaged in this issue. That from time to time, there's criticism or whatever, and they're out there on a daily basis looking for solutions. It is challenging. And as Monica said, there are negotiations going on that can't be discussed. But believe me, they're fully engaged, and I'm proud of the work that the planning department and the Main Streets program is doing. Secondly, it should be noted that the mayor of this city plays by the same rules as anyone else. The city manager does, the city council does, the planning director does. We don't have reserved spaces. right in front of our buildings or whatever. We play by the same rules as any other citizen and any other business. And I want to make sure people are aware of that, because there have been suggestions that we regulate and we administer, but we don't play by the same rules, and I assure you that we do.
And
Thank
so
you.
Philip would like to speak just briefly to code enforcement, if we could. Thank you, sir.
Can
So,
I ask one more question, Mr. Mayor? This is outside of parking, so are you gonna come back up again, Monica, before we leave?
I've got some stuff for y'all later for executive session, so
Okay.
I'll still be here.
Okay.
Okay. One of the things that we did here while we're out in the field, we get confronted by merchants when you're counting parking, is that there's selective enforcement. If you're reading Facebook, you're hearing a lot about, well, so-and-so
lot.
gets to do what they want,
A lot.
and you heard John reference that specifically. And then I want to remind you that our code enforcement is typically reactive, not out there trying to hurt people. You know, we're not looking for errors, right? Philip does, if the way I understand it, Philip is spending about 1 hour each day on parking, and I've asked him to be a little bit more random about it. And he is now actually doing a little bit on the weekends and trading that out, to just keep it a little bit more random. But if people have repeat offenders, when I first got here, there was a business that will go unnamed because they're still active. They would send their restaurant employees to go park in front of the other restaurant. And the employees would tell me that's what they were doing. So it's not like we don't have a competitive nature in our downtown. But I heard the word graft for the first time while I was out walking around. Accusations that we're not doing regular enforcement, or that some people are receiving privileges because they're gifting the city's things. I just want to say that is not happening. That is almost slanderous in its
It's
nature.
on Facebook.
And so, will you speak to code enforcement, please, and how you're handling that, and maybe the most intensive you've been doing lately?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I've been listening to all of this, and I will dare say that my biggest headache in all my job is parking. I've been referred to as the white devil and a lot of other things. I think everybody here knows this. I have a lot that I do for the city. Sometimes I get stretched thin. I do a lot, and parking takes a lot of time. And I dedicate as much as I can. I do miss things. I'm human. I only have, but parking is being enforced. I have pages and pages and pages of citations that have been written. It's
Tell me
not.
the amount you used on the KPI. I'm sorry, on the performance standards that we gave to John.
I write upward of 200 tickets a year, parking tickets. It's not that it's not being enforced. That's not the issue. We got people right now that literally I just go write them a ticket every day. They're there every day. They just look at it as a cost of doing business.
And they use it as a write-off.
Yes. Now, I will say that when the fines were increased to 50, and on the fourth going to 100, I can dare say that if Sarah had done this 6 months ago, she would not have seen the empty spaces that she's seen. This has made a big difference. This was a good move that the city made. When it was $15 per ticket, people just says, give me the ticket, I'll pay it. But when it went to 50 and then went to 100, they began to pay attention. The key here is that it's not that the tickets are being written. The fact of it is that as the fines increase, I think you get more compliance there. And if the $50 don't help, you may need to increase it again. That's what seems to be getting people's attention.
So, when we're out in the field and people want to offer you comments, sometimes I get a little woofy. And my comment was, how many municipal parking lots and decks do you run? How much on-street parking do you run? Because that's what's really helpful. So we've made those phone calls. The last parking survey we called the cities of Gainesville, Rome, and Athens, where the Downtown Development Authority does manage their parking. They have a full-time parking person or a part-time parking person. We are very grateful that Philip provides the 1 hour every day that he can devote, because he's doing a myriad of other things. There are cities that, so John's gotten y'all to address the fine problem, but that was more of a financial deficit problem because we were losing money for every ticket Philip wrote. There are cities that, if you decide that the next step you want to take to make sure parking is turning over, there are cities that have ramping fines. The first one, we do this in our fire lanes right now. Gene Porter came in and asked y'all to do that. The first ticket is $50, the second one's $75, the third one is $150, and it's within a given time period for repeat offenders. It's the way you get their attention, so you could do that. I don't think we're there yet. When we first started this study, we talked about whether we should recommend to John that city off-street parking, particularly since we need revenue sources, maybe we should look at making our lots pay lots. The one that we most recently purchased was a paid lot, and those people are now parking there for free, but they were paying $30 to $60 a month per space to make sure they had an assured parking space. The cities that are moving toward parking management, the next step after fines, ramping fines, and a dedicated code enforcement officer toward parking, or a parking meter maid, if you want to call it that. That sounds sexist. I'm not going to go there. The next one is pay lots and pay decks. And that allows you to buy other land for parking or to restripe every year because you have money to do that. We can look at that, but that would that's a big step for Madison. We're entering a new century, and maybe the fact that we've hit 100% occupancy, it's time to reevaluate that and let us put the numbers together and see if John thinks that is worth y'all's consideration, if it'll be enough money to pay for some of the parking improvements. But every space the city provides in the downtown is a subsidized parking space off of the backs of the residential taxpayer, every one of them. And so we'll do a cost comparison study on you, but we don't think we're ready for off-street paid unless we have one more big lot or a big deck. But it may be something that with 100% occupancy, y'all need to start preparing yourselves for that.
If I may, Hancock Street has been, yes. Just for clarification, this goes back probably at least 2 decades. From Burnett Street down to the back behind Drifty Mac Drugs, that has not been enforced in decades. The previous city manager said that those were given just to park. If the city wants that to be, if Mr. Clem wants that to be reinforced, that's the reason that it hasn't. It's not that I was just ignoring it. It's just it just hasn't been. It was taken away, but it's never been re-implemented. And
let's be clear, it wasn't taken away. The previous city manager decided that just wasn't going to be ticketed,
yes,
and it wasn't going to be timed. So you can make a change in policy on that, just like the previous city manager decided that everything next to the creamery was going to go timed. That went timed about right before Ann left. So what, 6 years ago now? 8 years ago now? 4 years ago now. So that's why that's new, and that everybody's settling into that because we had somebody new move into the creamery. And so that's been a transition period as well. I had one council member that mentioned to me, were we ready for a full-time parking attendant? I don't think we're ready for a full-time one, but parking could be something that we could have someone do 1 or 2 hours a day, and that doesn't have to be a highly skilled professional like Philip. I mean, it literally is there a car in that space? Has it been there? And we could, I don't want to say an intern, but that could be a lower skilled employee, part-time, that is just doing just that function, that perhaps is paid by the permit fees that we're doing for other things. And maybe that takes some gives an hour or two back a day to Philip, but provides a little bit more concentrated enforcement. But all those are things that we put in the report for John's consideration for him to mull over and recommend to y'all or not recommend to y'all. And I think we're done today unless you have any other questions for us.
I just want to close by saying that, I've been working with the county manager a lot. Adam and I have a real good relationship. He calls me. I have written his employees quite a few tickets. He'll call me and say, hey, I got a couple of employees out there, and he wants them ticketed. They have been ticketed, because it's not fair to people coming to pay the taxes by their tags that they don't have anywhere to park.
I agree.
But it's being enforced. It's just that the perception is not. If I write somebody a ticket, they begin to, on Facebook or whatever, they begin to claim that I'm picking on somebody, but that's just a perception.
One thing I'd just like to leave you with, please, and I don't know that there's any one specific person in this room or any specific department, but one of the things that I think we can do to help perception is people don't drop in or talk to people about how they need to get their employees to do better. There has been discussion in the field that some people are approached and are chastised and other people are not. I think that needs to be an administrative function, and it needs to be one designated person and not maybe all of us. And not that all of us are doing that, but we've had at least a complaint that one or two other departments are saying something. And I'm not saying it should be planning, but whoever John designates as that person, it needs to be just that person and not a pile-on, because I think that some of the perceptions of or comments about graft or selective enforcement or favoritism can be nipped in the bud if it's only going through one person.
We need to make sure we do it on social media as well, because it's on social media.
Yeah, and so I think that if John wants to frame through Karen and Ken a response to that, that's one thing.
Yes.
But other than that, stay off social media and don't
Yes.
comment on it.
A quick question on the study. Do you think are the conclusions from the study applicable to the whole calendar year?
So in the last time we counted them spring and fall. We avoid event weekends or event days because those are not truly reflective. If you'd like your Main Street program to do a fall count too, we will. But right now we want to finish up doing the whole downtown, provide you a very specific residential snapshot, because there are myths about residential that aren't real. And so we want to have a focus in on residential, and I actually want to have a focus in on employee off-street. I think that's where the problem is lying, is employee off-street. And I think once we do that, we'll have a better picture. And if you want us to repeat it in the fall, it doesn't take but about 2 weeks.
Well, are the biggest tourist seasons, is it spring and fall? It's not summer, is it?
I'll rely on Sarah, who used to work at the CVB, to tell me when might be a good tourism season. Maybe we want to count
Spring and fall.
tourism and off-tourism season.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And if you have any other questions or thought, if you'll relay those to John, I'm sure he'll get them to us.
Thanks, Monica.
Thank you.
Great job, appreciate that. John, agenda policies, you want to talk about
Yes,
that?
I just wanted to give you, Mayor, and the members of the council an update, and I have provided an updated version of the agenda ordinance. I was asked to solicit opinions from staff, and I provided that to you as well. First, let me go through the suggested changes, then we'll talk about the comments. There was a comment, and I provided you a highlighted copy to indicate those sections that I'm going to be discussing. There was a concern raised that in the fourth line that we were somehow limiting public comment by this ordinance. And what that is that's a provision that's already in place, which says that if you're going to request an audience of the council to talk about a generic item that's not on the agenda, that you have to make a request to the city clerk. That provision is already in our ordinances. And so this does not impact at all people that want to make public comment about agenda items, zoning, planning, whatever the case may be. This would not be impacted by that. The next clarification says the meeting agenda and supplements thereto, meaning the documentation that would have to be received by the city clerk by Monday preceding the meeting would have to include the entire package, both the agenda item and the documentation, the backup, for Monday for our city clerk to make available to the general public. And then the last item is a clarification that was raised about what happens if the item is late. And this ordinance clarifies it, that if it's late, then it has to go to the next meeting. Now, that does not take away the mayor and council's absolute right to set an agenda, right, Jay?
And an amended agenda.
And amend the agenda. So if there's something of such urgency that you want to circumvent this ordinance, we're not taking away the inherent right of the mayor and the city council to set an agenda. And the only item that's still not here, Jay, that we want to put in there is a requirement that after the agenda is published, that any public comment that's received by staff, the city manager, or the city clerk is immediately transferred to the members of the council, so that you're seeing public comment as soon as we receive it. So other than that, and other than the request to Jay that he put in that additional provision that requires immediacy in terms of notification of public comment, then comes the issue of whether this should be an ordinance or this should be a policy. And there's an honest disagreement. And I think that it really depends whether you're asking an attorney or whether you're asking an elected official. Because I think that an attorney's orientation is to protect the city. So to minimize regulations to protect the city, just do what you absolutely have to do and nothing more. Where the orientation in terms of being a public servant or being an elected official is that transparency is the most important. That our citizens, because they're our bosses, have every right to know exactly what it is that we're going to be discussed. And that, in the end of the day, is the rub. And you can choose whether you want this as a policy or an ordinance. I recommend at the end of the day, I err on the side of transparency and the public's inherent right to know what their government is doing. And so we'll have that debate, I guess, at the next council meeting. So having said that, are there any questions about the changes that were made or any rationale as to what we're doing and why?
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Sure.
John, I'm sorry I stepped out and missed kind of the first part. When somebody wants to come forward making public comments about something that's not on the agenda, is there a way that we can limit the time? Are you looking at that? I mean, they come in here, and Jake can probably answer this. You know, you end up here listening to, like we had the last couple of times, with public comment, and it just goes on and on and on. And I think there should be, but I don't know what that takes on.
The quick answer is yes, you do have the ability to put a time limit on it. Ken, I think after the last meeting, pointed out to me that there is one, and I forget if is it 10 or 15 minutes? 10 minutes is what is in your ordinance right now, so that's their maximum that they can speak. You can lessen that, you can expand that, it's totally in y'all's discretion. The only thing is once you set it, you gotta do it evenly across the board. So if you cut someone off at 10 minutes, you can't let the next person go for 12. So it's just, you can set it to whatever you want, and then it's just the mayor and council enforcing it from there.
Mayor, may I ask one question? The 10 minutes, to me, seems too long. And if you have, like that, last time, we had 2 people that wanted to talk. So that could go, what if we have 6 that come in and they want to talk, and we give them 10 minutes? That's another hour.
I will say that your neighboring cities that I am familiar with do 5 minutes, so.
And I should have provided clarity right from the beginning, because there was an unfortunate slip by our local newspaper when they covered our first discussion, suggesting that this proposal was about all of our committees. And it never was, and it isn't. I haven't observed enough committees. I don't even know whether or not something like this is necessary. That's more for you to decide. But I have attended every single council meeting for a year and a half, and that is why I'm drawing conclusions about the operations of this. But not only did I say in my presentation that this was not to be applied at this time unless the council decides to, committees and commissions, but a follow-up question by Councilor Joyce, I was asked whether or not this covers committees, and I said, no, it didn't. So unfortunately, the reporter didn't watch the whole meeting. But this is a proposal that impacts the council only.
And Mr. Mayor, if I just want to make one clarifying point so everyone's clear, what Councilmember Latham is asking about the public comment in the 10 or 5 minutes, that is separate than the public hearings for zoning actions or budget hearings or whatever. Those are mandated by state code in your ordinances, and it's 15 minutes each side or whatever. This is just if a citizen has something that they want to speak to the council about, that this is what we're talking about with the 10 minutes or the 5 minutes or the 15 minutes, whatever you want to give them. So
And the council don't have to give any feedback, just listen to them, listen to their comments, and don't do any.
City attorney, that would be my recommendation, is you let them say their piece. Mr. Mayor, you say, thank you, we'll look into it, we'll have the city manager look into it or whatever, because the conversation back and forth, the last meeting is the example, and poor Aaron kind of got put on trial. That usually doesn't end well for anybody. It's if they have a complaint, come say your complaint, okay, thank you for coming, and then the next person can get up and say their piece, so.
And so this will be put on the next agenda, either the next agenda or the agenda afterwards. I've wanted to give the council enough time to give it some thought and think about it or whatever, so we haven't rushed it. And so, but these are our latest changes, but as I said, Jay still needs to put in language that would require public comment to get to you as quickly as possible. Okay. You want me to do my city manager's report?
Yes, sir.
I only have several items, and I know we have an executive session today, so I'll be brief. The first comment that I wanted to make is, obviously, our planning department has done a really comprehensive piece of work on the issue of industrial growth that is now before the Planning and Zoning Commission. I applaud them. They are thoughtful, and they are taking time, because it is a very complex proposal with many moving parts. So we certainly hope that they take the time necessary. But at the same time, we recognize that there was a moratorium in place, so we want to get something back to you in a timely fashion. I think we're still doing all right in that regard. There was a couple of you raised specific questions about testimony that was given at the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I've asked Molly and/or Monica to make themselves available maybe after this meeting or sometime thereafter, so that they can provide you clarity on the issue that was raised. And the other issue I wanted to raise, I just wanted to give you an update. I was planning on putting a lease before you at the next meeting. It may have to go one more meeting, which is fine. We've been negotiating with the CVB on the lease of our building. And I am delighted at the board chair, Pat Hodges, and Jennifer Rose's approach, which has been very productive and very helpful. There's one issue about what their liability should be if someone got hurt or whatever the case may be, and I think, Jay, you're working on some language. And assuming we can work that out, we'll have a lease before you. So from now on, that building will be leased, we'll be receiving rent, and we're working hand in hand with the CVB. And that's basically it, Mr. Mayor, unless there are questions.
Any questions, Mr. John?
Will that lease, John, apply to the upstairs as well? Will the CVB have the right to sublease the upstairs or not, or?
They will not have the right to sublease. They certainly have the right, as they always have, to use the upstairs when it's not used by, for their board meetings or whatever the case may be. So the arrangement isn't changing. They've had the right to use that, but the lease contemplated does not allow for subletting.
John, can you give us an update while you're talking about the chamber meeting, Welcome Center? What time frame are we looking at for the old chamber building as a move-in option for?
I don't, is Ms. Karen here? I think I see her. There she is. Can you give us an update on the chamber building update?
Good morning. So yes, we are heading closer to final completion over there than we were weeks ago. We had hoped to be done a little bit earlier, but ran into a few bumps in the road. Didn't realize there was so much concrete in that building that could delay some of the things that we needed to get done. But painting has been completed. We're looking to have flooring installed this week. We're looking at probably a almost ready move-in date about April 15th, and that is with furniture delivery and all other types of things that need to get in before we'll be able to do that. So I've already been talking with our staff about packing up their current locations. We just got boxes yesterday, which is news to the two of them that are in the room. So we'll be packing up items and getting ready to start moving items in probably within the next couple of weeks or so. But we hope to have a move-in date of about April 15th, and obviously we'll do an open house so that council can walk through. I think the mayor has already been over. Councilmember Reed may have peeked in a couple of weeks ago. Councilmember Joyce, you came over and joined us just for a brief look at one point.
I peeked in the windows.
You peeked in the window. Well, I'm happy to give anyone that would like just kind of a walkthrough, a soft walkthrough. There's still some touch-up things that are going in, but I'm pretty excited about the progress. I'm looking forward to the staff having a great new space.
Initiate budget discussions, we're going to have a serious conversation about the condition of some of our other buildings that have been not given proper attention to, and so we're going to be talking about buildings as well very shortly, other buildings.
Thank you.
So is it true that my City Hall desk is moving into your old office?
Your City Hall desk?
Excuse
Just
yeah, you
asking.
might have to fight about whose desk
I'm sorry.
that is.
Oh, that's right, okay.
Okay.
All right, I retract that question, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, that is our work session this morning, and we're going to go into our call meeting to talk about Central Georgia EMC agreement for electrical services. Karen?
Good morning. This is an agreement for electrical service for the pump station at the Safari Park between the city and Central Georgia EMC. And basically, this is just a formality that Central Georgia EMC would like for us to approve, and then they should be good to go for the city's pump station to supply services to the Safari Park. I know that they're eager to get all this online pretty soon, and so I'll try to answer any questions that y'all have.
I might have to phone my friend Wayne Gann. But, and the attorney, has looked over this and, has signed off on it that he is okay with this.
Why does the, I've lost the thing, since it's not an addendum anymore, I can't find it. But there was a reference to the 220 acres. Why is that? I mean, the pump station doesn't take up 220 acres, but there.
No, but it does sit on the park itself. It's inside the park, and we have an easement for it to be there. And so they're just referencing where it's sitting, as
Okay.
far as the park itself and also the address.
Okay, I mean, simply put, we're not taking responsibility for the power for all 220 acres.
No, this is just for the electrical
Okay.
service for our pump station. They have another agreement with the safari park for electrical service for the rest of the park. This is just our portion of it that they have to serve.
Do you have any idea, Karen, why it is when you Google map the address on that application, which was at 1791,
Yes, Monticello Highway.
it pops up that BP gas station on the north side of I-20, right across from Love's. Do you have any idea why that is?
I'm sorry, I was not paying attention.
Addressing for the old Liberty, the BP station, and versus the address to the safari park.
The address for the safari park would have been assigned by the county, not us, so I can't speak to that. The entrance is a temporary entrance, and so their temporary and their final address might be different. I'd have to check on that.
Also, Google Map addresses and what's assigned by Sears County don't always sync up.
Okay, because this came up
Right.
too, and I think we did the right-of-way for the safari park south of I-20, and the address listed on the paperwork was that BP station on the other side of I-20. So you think it's just
Yeah, we'll verify
the
the
Google Maps
addresses.
error?
That's why,
We get a lot of Google Maps errors. I mean, it's just.
All right.
that's why attorneys put lots of details in there, like the parcel number,
Yeah.
the number of
Right.
acreage, because addresses kind of come and go.
Gotcha, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. If there are no more questions for Karen, we can get a motion and second for move forward with this.
So moved.
Are there more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none. Vote unanimously.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you.
If we could get a motion and a second to go into executive session to discuss real estate, is that meeting?
So moved.
And personnel, Mayor. Real estate and personnel.
Real estate and personnel.
Real estate and personnel.
All
So
in favor,
moved.
show of hands.
Real estate and personnel?
Right. All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none. Vote unanimously.
Mr. Mayor, can you
Anybody
use
need to
the
take